Hey, welcome back. Today we're jumping into a prayer that's about 3,000 years old, but honestly, it feels like it could have been written yesterday. It's an ancient cry for help, written from the middle of a total crisis. And we're going to unlock the power of Psalm 3.
I mean, just listen to that. You can feel the panic, right? The feeling of being completely surrounded. And it's not just that he has enemies. They're actively mocking him, saying, "You're done. Even your God has abandoned you." Wow.
So that's the big question for us today. Who is this person? What on earth was happening to him? And why is it that this one prayer, out of so many, still hits so hard after all this time? Okay, let's get into it.
First thing you need to know is that this isn't just a random emotional rant. It actually follows a very specific pattern, almost like a blueprint for how to cry out to God when your world is completely falling apart.
It's a special category called a petition psalm. It's basically a genre of prayer designed for those moments of absolute distress, when you need to call on a higher power for a rescue, like right now. And what's so cool is the hidden structure. These prayers almost always follow 5 key steps. First, you address God directly. Then comes the lament. That's the complaint, where you lay it all out. Then there's this really important pivot to confidence. Then you make your actual request, the petition. And finally, the conclusion. It's this powerful roadmap, and Psalm 3 follows it perfectly.
And check it out. Here's how it maps out. It starts right off the bat with a direct address. "Oh Lord." No preamble, just straight to the point. And that's immediately followed by the lament, the raw, honest complaint. "I'm surrounded. Enemies are everywhere. They're rising up against me."
But then, watch this. This is the pivot. Before he even asks for anything, the author shifts his focus to confidence. "But you, Lord, are a shield around me." He reminds himself who he's talking to first. It's only after he's grounded himself in that trust that he makes the petition. "Arise, Lord, deliver me." See? It's not just poetry. It's this incredibly wise psychological and spiritual process. Okay, so now that we get the how of the prayer, let's dig into the why. What was the story behind it? Because this wasn't just some minor personal issue. This was a full-blown national crisis, and at its heart was a family betrayal of epic proportions. So the backstory comes from the book of Samuel in the Hebrew Bible. It all starts with King David's own major mistakes, which create this incredibly toxic family dynamic. His son, Absalom, ends up murdering his own brother, flees, and then comes back to stage this absolutely brilliant and devastating political coup. He literally steals the hearts of the people, and before you know it, the great King David is on the run, forced to flee his own capital city, being hunted by his own son. And this is the clincher. How do we know all this? Because the psalm tells us directly. That little note at the very top, the superscript, it ties this prayer to that exact historical moment. So this isn't just some abstract poem about trouble. It's the real, raw, in-the-moment cry of a betrayed father and a king who's just lost everything. And this line really drives home the scale of it all. When David talks about his foes, he's not being dramatic. He means literal armies, tens of thousands of them. This is the prayer of a general who's facing a military uprising led by the one person he should have been able to trust the most.
So knowing all that history brings us to what might be the most fascinating part of this whole psalm. It's this powerful paradox, a lesson about how total trust in God and strategic, decisive human action can and should go hand in hand.
So as David is fleeing, he gets word that his son has recruited the single most brilliant political strategist in the kingdom, a guy named Ahithophel. David knows he is completely outmatched tactically, so his very first move? Prayer. He asks God to just scramble the enemy's plans. That right there is total dependence.
But he doesn't stop there. Not at all. Right after praying, David launches this incredibly sophisticated counterintelligence plan. He retreats so he can pick the battlefield. He sends trusted people back into the city as assets. He sets up a spy ring to pass messages, and he sends his own top advisor to pretend to switch sides and become a double agent, all to sabotage the enemy's strategy from the inside. So what is this telling us? It's showing us this amazing dynamic. David prays as if 100% of it depends on God, and then he works as if 100% of it depends on him. It's a faith that trusts God completely, while at the same time using every single bit of skill, intelligence, and strategy that God gave him. You know, the theologian Bruce Waltke tells this fantastic story that really brings this idea to life. It's from when he was teaching his young daughter the story of David and Goliath.
So he'd play Goliath and she'd play David. He taught her to say, "I trust in God," and then she'd sling a ping pong ball from a dish towel and defeat him. But one time, she just said the words, "I trust in God," and stood there, just waiting. When he didn't fall down, she got confused. And he told her, "I know you trust in God, honey, but you didn't throw the ping pong ball. Faith has to act."
Okay, so we've got the structure, we've got the history, we've got this deep theology of faith in action. Let's put it all together and ask, why? Why has this one psalm stuck around and meant so much to so many people for so long? Let's look at its legacy. This verse is just incredible. In the middle of being hunted by an army, David says he could lie down, go to sleep, and wake up, all because he knew God had his back. Now, for centuries, the early Christian church read this and saw something even deeper than a good night's sleep. They saw a prefiguring of Jesus rising from the sleep of death on Easter morning. And because of that profound connection, this psalm became a huge deal in daily worship. The Desert Fathers in the 4th century made it their morning prayer. It became a cornerstone for monks. For generations, it's been the go-to model for how to face down impossible odds, teaching that even though we have to do our part, the final victory, the deliverance, belongs to God. And really, in the end, that's the timeless challenge Psalm 3 leaves us with. It's not a simple answer, but a dynamic tension. It makes us look at our own lives, our own crises, and ask that question: how do we build a faith that is both fully surrendered and fully engaged? A trust that is both a prayer and a plan.